My own father destroyed my $43 million inheritance check on the day that my grandfather's will was read. The scream that he let out was, "Your white uniform is a joke. It's worthless in the real world." However, he was unaware of the fact that ash was the kindling for my war. My name is Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Reeve, and I am 38 years old. I serve in the United States Navy. As I stood there, deep within the lion's den, my spine was a column of discipline, and I was positioned at a modified parade rest. A silent fortress of luxury perched high. The law offices of Vance and Associates were a place of great prominence. The air smelt like polished mahogany and quiet confidence as it rose above La Jolla Cove, a spot where the weather was calm. As one looked out through the enormous windows, the Pacific Ocean appeared to be a blank canvas of blue all around. On the other hand, the atmosphere within this conference room was as dense and emotionally charged as the air that exists just before a lightning strike. In this world of Tom Ford suits and Hermes purses, my service dress white uniform, which is a stark emblem of honor, felt like an alien thing. It was an affront to this world. It was a world that I had been born into, but I had made a conscious decision to leave. Even though he was using his iPad, Richard Harlan, the father, did not glance up. His fingers, which were decorated with a hefty gold ring, moved across the screen as if my presence were nothing more than an annoying smudge on the periphery of his fingers. A guy who measured his life in stock values, he was the chief executive officer of Aegis Dynamics, a force to be reckoned with in the world of defense contracting. On the other side of the sparkling table, my sister Vanessa sent a quick, icy glance in my direction. She had a look of pure, unadulterated hatred on her face, and her lips played with a sneer that was almost undetectable. There was no sign of her sibling in sight. While she was evaluating a rival, she noticed that they had selected the incorrect weapons for this conflict. Simply put, there was a thick oppressive silence, a willful ostracism that was more deafening than any shout. There were no pleasantries and there was no welcome home. My hands were clasped behind my back as I maintained my stance, and I paid no attention to the tightening knot that was developing in my stomach. Their domain included this area. One reason I went here was to fulfill a promise I had made to my grandfather. She cleared her throat as Harriet Cole, who had been the family's attorney for many years, spoke. There was simply the sound of paper rustling, the sound. It was then that she started reading the will and testament that Admiral Thomas Reeve had left behind. Her voice was a monotone drone, an instrument that had been practiced for the purpose of conveying news, whether it was good or terrible, with a detached finality. Vanessa was the recipient of the villa in Coronado. The unusual collection of books on naval history that belonged to the Admiral was given to Richard. Gifts that are generous and predictable. The muscles in my shoulders began to loosen up little. We would soon be done with this. Evelyn then proceeded to turn a page. She made a very little alteration in her cadence, which was a minor change that delivered a powerful message. Shatter the stagnant air with a jolt. She then read to my granddaughter, Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Reeve, with a tone that was now more subdued and careful in its emphasis. My only confidant and a fellow warrior in this situation. The entirety of the remaining portion of my estate is yours. In addition to all financial holdings and real estate properties, this also includes the controlling voting shares of Aegis Dynamics, which will take effect immediately. It was not a sound that broke the silence in the room. Rather, it was the abrupt sheer weight that caused it to break. The iPad belonging to Richard clattered onto a table. The arrogant expression that had been on his oldest face fractured, and it was replaced by a visceral expression of disbelief and rage. This caused the air in the room to be sucked out. In that void, Harriet Cole passed a cashier's check across the table with a steady hand. She did this while the vacuum was still present. There are 38,246,000. The rectangle, which was a brilliant shade of blue, was placed in the middle of the enormous table, and it appeared to be the calm eye of a hurricane. Then I realized that this was not a gift. It was a mandated task. The declaration of war was what it was. Even before I had a chance to comprehend the magnitude of the figure, Richard had already taken a breath, moved around. The man did not walk. He made a lunge. He was squeezing his chair against the floor with great force. In the manner of a poisonous snake, he seized the check off the table and jerked it away. Since I informed him that I would be accepting my acceptance to the Naval Academy, His eyes had been icy and calculating just a few moments ago. However, now they were burning with a wild and unfettered wrath that I hadn't seen before. One of the benefits of leaving behind one's family. He growled, his voice a low, violent growl that vibrated with years of wrath, and he snarled in order to play the role of a soldier. After then, he did something that was unimaginable. He drew out a Zippo filled with gold. The lighter, which was a gaudy gift from a Saudi business colleague, was opened with a flick of the finger. It was a little evil star in the dim light of the corporate world when the flame suddenly sprung to life. At the same time that his face was distorted, he spat out, "Let me show you its real value." He held the flame to the corner of the check, his fingers shaking with anger. "That white uniform is a costume, a pathetic charade. In the real world, the one where men make real money, it is worthless." The flames lapped at the paper, devouring the numbers, the signatures, and my name with a voracious appetite. The ink scorched and blackened. My grandfather's legacy, his final act of faith in me, was turning to black, brittle ash fluttering down onto the polished surface of their expensive hollow world. A sick, hollow feeling churned in my stomach, a physical pain that had nothing to do with the money. It was the brutal public annihilation of my life's choice, of my service, of my honor. I stood my ground. My training took over. I did not flinch. I did not cry out. My face remained a mask of disciplined calm. I simply watched him, this man who was my father, as he performed his act of ultimate rejection, and I felt the solid, reassuring weight of the second envelope, the one my grandfather had given me, still tucked away in the inner pocket of my uniform jacket. Their game was over. My war had just begun. The black ashes on the mahogany table swirled slightly in the air-conditioned breeze, and a memory sharp and cold cut through the shock. It wasn't the first time they had tried to erase me. The first time it was my entire past. As I walked into the sprawling Thorne family mansion in Coronado, my duffel bag slung over one shoulder, the first thing that I noticed was the silence. It was not a peaceful silence, but rather a hollow, empty one. I was exhausted down to my bones, but I was also filled with a naive excitement to be home, to sleep in my own bed, and to feel the cool San Diego air on my skin. I had just returned from my first deployment in the Persian Gulf, which lasted for 18 months. I had been exposed to sand, sea, and the constant grinding pressure of military law in a fighting zone. There was a cold metallic feeling that washed over me as I opened the door to my childhood bedroom, or what had been my bedroom in the past. The room had been completely transformed. My bed, which had been adorned with a navy blue comforter that I had owned since I was 16 years old, had been replaced by two sterile beige armchairs. My desk, which had been scarred by the history of late-night study sessions for the Naval Academy entrance exams, had been removed. In its place stood a glass table that contained a single perfect and utterly fake orchid. My bookshelves, which had previously been stuffed with novels and military history, were suddenly empty. My photos, my awards, the small framed flag from my Annapolis graduation. All of it had vanished as if I had never existed. Vanessa walked past the open door, a delicate teacup of mint tea in her hand. She paused, taking in the shock on my face with a small, satisfied smirk. "Don't be so dramatic, Alexandra," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's a sitting room now. It is of much greater utility. After all, it's not like you're ever going to be around to make use of it." She took a taste of her tea with a gentle sip, and glided away, leaving me standing in the ghost of my own life. It wasn't just a redecoration. It was an eviction, a quiet, brutal statement that my space, my history in this house was irrelevant. I was a guest, a transient, a footnote in the grand story of the Thorne family. The memory then shifted, sharpening to a more public humiliation. The last Christmas party I attended at the Coronado mansion. The house was a glittering spectacle, a scene straight out of a magazine, filled with the scent of pine roasting turkey and the quiet hum of wealthy, powerful people making connections. Richard stood at the head of the long dining table, a crystal glass of expensive Napa Cabernet Sauvignon in his hand. He looked every bit the corporate king, basking in the glow of his success. "A toast," he began, his voice resonating with authority. "To my daughter Vanessa, who this quarter single-handedly secured a $50 million contract with the Department of Defense. She is the future of Aegis Dynamics." A chorus of hear hear and applause filled the room. Vanessa inclined her head graciously, a perfect picture of the successful Aries. Then my father's gaze fell on me. The pride in his eyes vanished, replaced by an expression of tolerant, almost pitying amusement, and a toast for Alexandra as well, he added, as if remembering a minor detail. There were a handful of his business partners who laughed, a quiet, courteous sound that seemed like a punch in the face. She's still serving our country, working for the government. A stable career, I suppose. It is the face. A career that is secure. My uniform, my rank, and the years of sacrifice I had put in were humiliated by the remarks that lingered in the air. In the back of my neck, I felt the familiar heat of embarrassment creeping up. In their world, which is a world of relentless ambition and deals that are worth 9 figures. It was a charming and slightly awkward passion for me to devote my life to service. As the family's charity case, I was the peculiarity that they had to explain away when they went to parties. On that particular evening, the sting of his comments was so intense that I was unable to continue to tolerate the phony happiness. I managed to escape while driving my ancient Jeep Wrangler not to my empty apartment, but to the one location that seemed like a genuine homeport that I had been looking for. Home of my grandfather, which was a humble dwelling with a view of San Diego Bay. When I went there, the air was different. It was fresh and salty, and it did not have the oppressive smell of money. Admiral did not inquire as to what his problem was. He did not do it. Just before sitting down next to me on his worn wooden porch swing, he silently poured 2 glasses of bullet bourbon, handed one of them to me, and then poured another glass. We observed the lights of the Navy ships in the harbor from a distance, and it was a quiet moment, the constellation of one's goals. He finally got around to saying, "They don't understand honor, Seraph," and his voice was a low, reassuring rumble like an engine in the distance. When determining a person's value, they use monetary units. We evaluate it based on its honesty. Be sure that you never get the two confused. It was a slow drink of his bourbon that he took. I was listening to a speech by Admiral McCraven the other day, and it was about making your bed. He followed by saying, "You know, I was listening to that speech. According to what he stated, if you want to make a difference in the world, you should never ever ring the bell first." He glanced at me, his eyes unclouded and unwavering in the dim light of the evening. "At this moment, Alexandra, they are ringing the bell for you. It is their intention to force you to give up. Are you going to let them?" When I was going through a storm of self-doubt and bitterness, his comments served as an anchor for me. It was a struggle that I was engaged in, one that was not waged with firearms but rather with expectations and subtle cruelties. He witnessed it. Never in my life would they have faith in my plans. A small stubborn voice murmured inside of me as I said, "So why? What is the point of me ever walking on theirs? How is it possible for me to construct a life that was so powerful and so self-sufficient, in the event that I would never have to experience the pain of their judgment ever more?" Even after I had left his porch that evening, the words of my grandfather continued to reverberate in my head. You should never give them the power to force you to ring the bell. Therefore, the first step in my response to the question of how to construct a life that they were unable to touch was to engage in an act of utter and total separation. My life began in a small one-bedroom apartment in North Park, San Diego. It was a place with outdated plumbing and flimsy walls, and the incessant hum of the Interstate 8055 freeway served as my lullaby. It was, however, mine. The security deposit and the first month's rent were both paid using the small savings I had accumulated during my time at the academy. I felt that my signature on the lease agreement was more meaningful than any signature I would put on a document pertaining to the military. My first dinner in that vacant apartment consisted of a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese and a can of Coors Light, both of which I consumed while sitting on the floor as it was completely empty. A taste of freedom could be described as the flavor of that uncomplicated dinner. A flavor that is both bitter and sweet, conveying feelings of rebellion and loneliness. There and then I made a solemn promise to myself. I would ensure that the Thorne family never again received even a single cash from them. Not even for a cup of coffee, not even for a gift for the holidays, nor even for an unexpected emergency. I would use each dollar that I earned to build a brick in the wall that would protect my independence. This life turned into a never-ending grind. Although my responsibilities as a JAG officer took up the most of my time during the day, I had additional work to do in the evenings and on the weekends. I took on more case evaluations, which required me to sift through extensive legal documents until my eyes burned. I began working as a military legal teacher for junior officers, charging them $100 per hour. Recently, I have been spending my Saturdays at the base library, rather than at the beach on the weekends. While Vanessa was attending charity galas and flying to Europe on the business jet, my idea of a luxury was a carne asada burrito from a tiny taqueria in Bureo Logan that I could afford without first checking my bank balance. Vanessa was attending charity galas and flying to Europe. The promotion of Vanessa to the position of Vice President of Aegis Dynamics could be described as a well-choreographed coronation, paved with the wealth and contacts that my father possessed. When it came to my personal promotions, I had to fight battles in the trenches. I was required to earn each and every proceed. In the beginning, my commanding officer, who was a strict and traditional Navy captain, had a suspicious attitude toward me. Through his eyes, I was able to see it. When he saw the name Thorne, he most likely believed that I was a privileged corporate brat fooling around with my appearance. As a result, I took the cases that nobody else wanted, the ones that were dirty and complicated. I was able to defend a young sailor who was accused of neglecting his duty by unearthing information that demonstrated his innocence in the face of a wave of internal politics. Through my efforts, I was able to unravel a complicated procurement fraud case that involved a senior official. There was no use of my family, a name. The inexorable logic of the law, along with my brain and my work ethic, were all utilized by me. Over time, I worked my way up to it. The moment that changed everything was when I was successful in defending a young Marine from being wrongfully convicted by a court-martial who was very unpleasant. My captain summoned me to take a seat in his office. Neither of them smiled. Simply nodding his head, his expression remaining as stern as ever, he replied, "Good work." That simple two-word acknowledgement earned through sheer merit felt more valuable than any multi-million-dollar contract my sister had ever landed. Was a currency they would never understand. But the path was not without its hardships. There were months when ramen noodles were my staple for a week straight, just to save enough to get the transmission on my old Jeep fixed. Loneliness was a constant companion, especially on holidays. But through it all, I remembered what my grandfather used to quote to me from the Bible, a verse he'd underlined in his personal copy. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. It wasn't just about religious faith. For both him and me, it was about discovering a source of power that came from within, a resilience that no one could take away. And then there were the mysterious deposits that would appear every few months, especially when things were tight. A small wire transfer of $2 or $300 would appear in my Navy Federal account. The sender description was always the same, from an old friend. I knew without a doubt that it was him. My grandfather never called to ask if I needed assistance because he knew that my pride would prevent me from accepting it. Instead, he offered support silently, like a sniper providing cover from a distance, never revealing his position. Those small sums weren't just about the money. They were a lifeline, a quiet reminder that someone somewhere was still in my corner, watching over me, believing in the path I had chosen. After leaving the Thorne family's cold, sterile version of reality, there was only one person I could think of, one person who operated on the same frequency of loyalty and blunt honesty that I understood. Rhea. Rhino Caldwell's legal practice was not located in a gleaming high-rise building. Rather, it was tucked away in a converted barracks at Liberty Station, a place that still breathed the spirit of the Navy. The historic Spanish colonial revival architecture stood in stark contrast to the modern, soulless glass towers that my father preferred. Inside, there was no mahogany or leather. Rather, there were old brick walls, shelves that were overflowing with legal binders, and the intense, potent smell of coffee, which was so potent that it could probably strip paint, of long nights and hard-fought battles. Rhea looked up as I walked in, her short steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes missing nothing. She was a retired JAG captain, a legend who had stared down admirals and won. She didn't offer condolences or ask a dozen questions. She simply pointed to a worn armchair piled with case files, pushed them onto the floor with a thud, and thrust a steaming mug of black coffee into my hands. "You look like you just walked through hell and back, Commander," she said, her voice a growly rasp. "Talk to me." And for the first time I did. Not as a daughter explaining a family squabble, but as one officer debriefing another. The whole story poured out of me. The cold reception, the reading of the will, the gold Zippo, the ashes fluttering down onto that polished table. I spoke without emotion, my voice steady, relaying the facts as I would in a courtroom. Rhea listened, her gaze never leaving my face, her only reaction an occasional affirming nod. She didn't interrupt with meaningless platitudes like, "I'm so sorry for your loss," or, "Everything will be okay." Her silence was a sign of respect, an acknowledgement of the gravity of the situation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring into her own coffee mug as if the answers were written in the black liquid. Then she looked up, her eyes hard as flint. "That man," she growled, her voice filled with righteous anger, unadulterated anger on my behalf. "He doesn't deserve a daughter like you." That rough, unvarnished statement hit me with the force of a physical blow, but a healing one. It was the most profound validation I had ever received. It was worth more than any praise from my father, any expensive gift from my sister. It was real. In that cluttered office, surrounded by the ghosts of other veterans' legal battles, I no longer felt like an outcast. I was among my own kind, a tribe that understood that honor wasn't a talking point in a corporate mission statement but a code you lived by and died for. The suffocating loneliness that had been my constant companion for years finally began to recede. That evening, Rhea refused to let me go back to my empty apartment. "No soldier goes back to an empty barracks after a firefight," she declared. She dragged me to Little Italy, to a small family-owned restaurant called Felipe's Pizza Grotto, a San Diego institution. The owner, a grizzled former Marine with a booming laugh, greeted Rhea with a bear hug. We slid into a red vinyl booth in a back corner, the air thick with the smell of garlic and oregano. We ordered a large pepperoni pizza and a picture of local craft beer from Ballast Point. We didn't talk about my family or the will or the money. Instead, we talked about the Navy. We traded stories about impossible commanding officers, about the absurdity of military bureaucracy, about inside jokes that only a service member would understand. For the first time in years, I laughed. Not a polite, strained laugh I used at Thorne family functions, but a deep, genuine laugh that came from the gut. As the evening wore on, the weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. When Rhea dropped me off at my apartment building later, she didn't offer a hug. She just gave me a firm nod. "Get some rest. The war's just started." As I unlocked my door and stepped into the quiet of my own space, I didn't feel the sting of resentment anymore. Instead, there was a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through my chest. I had found my forward operating base and I knew I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The warmth from that evening with Rhea lingered for a few weeks, a fragile shield against the cold reality of my family. For a brief, foolish moment, I allowed a sliver of hope to take root. Perhaps, I thought, the scorched earth between us could over time begin to heal. Perhaps now that the initial shock had passed, they would retreat, and we could exist in a state of distant armed neutrality. It was a naive hope, the kind only someone starved for peace could harbor. The Thorne family didn't do neutrality. They only understood total victory or total annihilation. And I had just become their primary target. The first volley was fired not with an angry phone call, but with a quiet bureaucratic denial. I was at a coffee shop in North Park trying to get some work done. When I went to pay for my latte, I handed the barista my Navy Federal debit card. She ran it, then handed it back with an apologetic frown. "I'm sorry it's declined," I frowned, a prickle of annoyance rising. "That's impossible. Can you try it again?" I knew exactly how much was in that account. She tried again, the same result. A cold knot of unease began to form in my stomach. This wasn't a glitch. I stepped outside. The bright California sun, suddenly feeling harsh and interrogative, and called the credit union's customer service line. After navigating the automated menu and waiting on hold, a polite but distant voice came on the line. I explained the situation. There was a long pause filled with the sound of typing. "Ma'am, I'm showing here Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Reeve." "Yes, that's me." "According to our records, ma'am," the voice said, detached and clinical, "this account was closed 2 weeks ago due to notification of the account holder's passing." The words didn't register at first. Her passing? What does that mean? "It means, ma'am, that the account holder was reported as deceased." Deceased? The word hung in the air. Absurd and horrifying. "That's a mistake," I said. My voice, tight, I am the account holder. I am very much alive. The silence on the other end was heavy with bureaucratic indifference. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we received official documentation. There's nothing I can do from my end. A wave of nausea and cold dread washed over me. This was my father's work. It had his fingerprints all over it. An attack that was both devastatingly personal and coldly impersonal, executed through the faceless channels of corporate procedure. Panic, a feeling I hadn't experienced since my early days of training, began to claw at my throat. I ended the call and drove, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my Jeep, straight to the DMV office in Claremont, a place known for its soul-crushing lines and Kafkaesque logic. I needed to see it in black and white. I needed to see how far they had gone. After an hour that felt like an eternity, standing in a line that snaked through the drab, soulless building, I finally reached the counter. I handed the clerk, a virile woman with tired eyes, my driver's license, and my military identification card. She typed my information into her antiquated computer system. She frowned, typed again, and then leaned back, her expression shifting from one of boredom to one of bewildered pity. Ma'am, she began, her voice low, as if she were delivering a medical diagnosis. There seems to be a flag on your file. A flag for what? Which type of flag is it? My heart was pounding against my ribs as I asked her the question. She looked at me, then back at her screen, and then back at me one more time. According to the state of California and the Social Security Administration, this Social Security number belongs to an individual who was declared legally dead 2 weeks ago. I stared at her, the blood draining from my face. I was a ghost, a phantom, standing in a government office. I am standing right here, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I am obviously not dead. The woman gave me a look of genuine sympathy, a look that said she'd seen it all. But this was a new level of insanity. I can see that, honey. I really can, she said softly. But the system, it doesn't. You'll have to go to the county clerk's office, the vital records department, and file for a correction. Could take months. Months. I walked out of the DMV and into the blinding sunlight, my legs unsteady. I was legally dead. My money was inaccessible. My identity had been stolen and buried under a mountain of paperwork. They hadn't just disowned me, they had erased me. They tried to erase me entirely without a trace. Back in my apartment, my hands shaking with a rage, I remembered the second envelope, which was the one that my grandfather had given to me. It had been written, "Do not open this unless they try to burn it all down." They had not only attempted to burn it, but they had also attempted to bury the ashes. I tore it open, and inside, along with a stack of legal documents, was a small black USB flash drive. I inserted it into my laptop, and there was only one file, a video. My grandfather's face filled the screen, and his eyes appeared to be tired and thinner than I had experienced in the past, were as sharp and clear as a winter sea. "Seraph," he said, his voice calm and steady, a voice that had once commanded fleets. "If you are watching this, it means Richard has done what I always feared he would. He will not just try to take your inheritance. He will try to take your very existence. Do not trust the system, my girl. They have bought it. Trust what I have left for you. The fight is yours now. So fight like it." The video ended. The screen went black. The room was silent, but a roar was building in my head. The roar in my head, the one ignited by my grandfather's video, was a controlled burn. I was a legal ghost erased by a penstroke, but I was still a naval officer. My training dictated a calm, strategic response. I would call Rhea. We would assemble the evidence. We would file the motions. We would fight this war in the sterile logical arena of the law. I still believed foolishly that there were rules of engagement. That evening I was sitting on my floor surrounded by the documents my grandfather had left me, trying to piece together the legal puzzle when I flicked on the television for some background noise. And then I saw him, my father, Richard Harlan. He was on QC News, the local San Diego station, seated across from a news anchor. He was wearing a deep navy suit, a somber tie, and an expression of carefully crafted paternal concern. This was his preferred battlefield, the court of public opinion, where truth was malleable and perception was everything. "Mr. Thorne," the anchor began, her voice smooth and serious. "There have been some unsettling rumors surrounding the estate of your late father-in-law, Admiral. Can you comment on the alleged family dispute?" Richard let out a long practiced sigh. The kind a man performs when he is burdened by the unfortunate affairs of lesser people. "Thank you for asking, Tessa Morgan," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "First and foremost, our family loves my daughter Alexandra very much. We are incredibly proud of her service to our country." He stopped, allowing the feeling of patriotism to linger in the air at that moment. A chilling feeling of dread began to creep up my spine. "On the other hand," he said, his tone turning to one of profound, mournful solemnity, "this was a calculated move. It is common knowledge that the experiences that our courageous men and women go through while serving our country overseas can leave deep scars. Since her return, Alexandra has been going through a difficult time. She is not always the same person." The expression on his face was one of exaggerated agony, and he leaned forward. "It has nothing to do with money. This has never been the case before. Regarding money, this is about maintaining the stability of a legacy that she is not now in a position to manage, as well as protecting a member of our family who is vulnerable. In spite of the fact that she is unable to see it at the moment, we are merely attempting to do what is best for her." He was risky. The atmosphere in my apartment became as cold as ice. My head was being burned in a controlled manner, but it suddenly burst into a full-blown flame. He was risky. He had the audacity to use my service, my sacrifice, my honor, and the very essence of who I am as a weapon while he was standing on a public stage while wearing a flag that was a deceptive representation of patriotism. Against me, you see. It wasn't only that he humiliated me. I was not simply being erased by him. I was being pathized by him. My biggest source of pride was being twisted by him into a diagnosis of mental instability. He was doing this in order to further his own avaricious and reprehensible goals. He twisted the very real struggles of veterans for personal gain. His shield and his sword was now the caricature of the injured veteran, a trope that he and his business buddies profited from but privately disdained. He was protecting himself with this stereotype. Each and every ounce of self-control, each and every disciplined lesson in calmness, vaporized away. To put it into perspective, the agony of the burn check and the shock of the legal death are nothing in compared to this. That was the most heinous act of betrayal. A character assassination of the highest degree came about as a result of this. The rage that sprang up inside of me was no longer raging. In its sharpness and absoluteness, it was a blade of ice. It was no longer the grief of a daughter who had lost her family. Rather, it had been replaced with the icy, unmistakable wrath of a Navy commander whose honor had been publicly degraded. I stared at the image of my father's face that was flickering on the screen, and I saw his well-rehearsed expression of grief. I was no longer able to look at a parent. The adversary was distinct and vividly defined when I spotted them. The purpose was now completely understandable. I got to my feet. I walked across the room to the small mahogany box that my grandfather had given me many years ago. It was the box in which I stored my most precious possessions, including my commission certificate, my service medals, and the old brass naval compass that he had given me on the porch of his house that night. My movement was stiff and robotic as I made my way to the box. I took it in my arm. My body felt both chilly and substantial to it, hand that is shaking. I observed the needle, which consistently and unflinchingly pointed in the direction of true north, as it had done all along. A picture of another warrior appeared in my head at that moment. A lady who fought her fights not on the sea but in the highest court of the nation, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a woman of tiny height but great uncompromising strength, who fought her battles in the United States Supreme Court. Rhea had once framed a quote of hers and displayed it in her office, and I recalled it. You should fight for the things that are important to you, but you should do so in a way that will encourage other people to join you. It was not my fight, no longer merely having to do with a will or a firm. It has to do with my name. The reason behind this was to commemorate my granddad. Each and every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine who had ever been discharged or pied by men such as Richard Harlan was the recipient of this message. I pushed the compass to the side. My phone was picked up by me. The trembling that had been occurring in my fingertips just a few moments ago had completely subsided here. I scrolled to Rhea's number, I said. It was no longer necessary to devise a plan for inconspicuous preparation. In the public space, they had brought the war to me by their actions. Their initial shot had been fired, photographed during a more sleazy campaign. If you have ever been brought to the edge of your limits, If you have ever had the very people who were supposed to protect you twist your own truth and use it against you, then you have experienced abuse. If you have ever found yourself in a situation where remaining silent is no longer an option, I would appreciate it if you could leave a remark. There is no need for more than one word. In this struggle, please let me know that I am not the only one. In addition, make sure to click the subscribe button since from this point forward, we will no longer be on the defensive. There is a full-scale counterattack that we are ready to execute. I turned the dial. I'm calling you. There was a first ring, and Ria answered it. I addressed Ria with a tone that was as serene and icy as the depths of the ocean. They made their move. Now it's time we respond with everything we've got. In my phone call to Ria, I did not make a request for assistance. It was an order to deploy somebody. There was no longer any time for mourning. The time for rage that was justified had come and gone. At this point, it was time for a chilling, brutal, and strategic execution. The next morning, Ria's office in Liberty Station, which had been cluttered, underwent a transformation. The reassuring bustle of a local law practice gives place to the concentrated atmosphere of the focused intensity of a command post located in the past. A large conference table had been moved away, and she had set up a whiteboard, which was quickly covered in a spiderweb of timeframes, names, and corporate entities that were connected by angry red lines. Both the aroma of coffee that had been sitting out for a day and a strong sense of purpose permeated the atmosphere. All of my private emotions, including the hurt and the betrayal, were repressed and stored away. My status as a daughter had changed. Being a commanding officer was my job, and I had my own personal battle room. It was the first time that Ria had called Kalen Kale Bishop. He is, an hour later, a man who appeared to be more of a university librarian than a former naval intelligence officer came. He was a calm and humble individual in his late 30s. He was carrying a heavy-duty Pelican case, which he unzipped with the efficiency of a seasoned professional, showing a variety of advanced forensic equipment. The only thing he did was shake hands firmly and be a calm leader. He did not waste time on pleasantries. His concentration remained unwavering. In the second package, which contained the fake stock transfer papers with my grandfather's signature, I set out the paperwork that he had left behind, variation of my signature that is more vulgar. In addition, I presented a stack of official papers of my military service, which included paperwork that were filled with my genuine signature and signed over the course of several years of duty. I went to work with Kalen. The only sounds that could be heard in the room were the gentle w of his scanner, the repetitive click of his keyboard, and the odd gulp of coffee. At the same time that Ria and I were sitting opposite him, we were discussing the legal vulnerabilities of Richard S. Enterprise while we were drinking the strong combination. In addition to conducting tax filings and tracing shell firms, we also minutes from board meetings that were cross-referenced. Every single one of my emotional feelings was relegated to a separate compartment, and the rationality of legal strategy took its place. I was well versed in this technique, which consisted of putting together evidence in order to construct an unconquerable argument. A corrupt contractor or a rogue cop was not the focus this time, which was the only difference between the two situations. My very own family was there. After working in complete silence for 2 hours, Kale went to his laptop and reclined back in his chair. He stated, "I've got it," in a tone that was unruffled and devoid of any drama. His monitor was turned in our direction. 2 images appeared side by side on the screen. "This," he said, pointing to the left, "is your authentic signature, Lieutenant Commander. I've analyzed 24 examples. Notice the distinct loop in the capital V of, and the slight upward flourish at the end of the V. It's a consistent unconscious habit." He then pointed to the signature on the stock transfer document. "And this is the forgery. The loop in the V is closed. The final stroke is flat and terminates abruptly." More importantly, he continued zooming in on the image. "The pixel analysis shows digital artifacting around the edges. This isn't a fresh signature. It's a low-resolution digital lift, a copy-paste job. My guess is they scanned it from your DD-21, your discharge papers, which are semi-public records. It's sloppy work, amateurish." He looked at me, his expression unchanged. "I can write a sworn affidavit on this analysis. No credible expert in the country could refute it." Ria let out a low whistle, the silver bullet. The injustice was no longer just a feeling in my gut. It was a verifiable fact, a piece of evidence that we could present to a judge. A round was now chambered, ready to be fired. Ria looked at me with serious expressions on her face. The legal evidence is solid, Alexandra. We can file for an emergency injunction, but Richard will fight back with everything he has. He will use his army of lawyers to bury us in motions to delay proceedings for months or even years. All the while his public relations machine continues to paint you as unstable on the nightly news. We need to control the narrative. We need a preemptive strike. I knew she was right. My father's power wasn't just in his bank account. It was in his influence, his ability to shape public perception. We couldn't just win in the courtroom. We had to win in the open where his lies would wither under the harsh light of public scrutiny. My mind immediately went to one name, Logan Drake. He was an old-school investigative journalist, a dying breed. He had a reputation for being relentless and incorruptible. The man who had exposed a massive bribery scandal involving a defense contractor and a powerful California congressman. A scandal that had ended with the congressman's resignation. Riker didn't bow to power. He dismantled it. I found his number through an old contact. I took a deep breath, my strategic mind taking over, and dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice a gruff. Riker. Mr. Riker. I uttered into my own voice. The voice of Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Reeve is heard clearly and steadily. I would want to tell you a story. There is a story about the dynamics of Aegis, an inheritance that was burned, a death certificate that was false, and a truth that they are attempting to conceal with all their might. The other end of the line remained silent for a considerable amount of time. I was practically able to hear the wheels spinning in his thoughts as he conducted his investigation. His abrasive tone of voice then returned at long last. This is no longer merely an inquiry. Rather, it is accompanied by a glimmer of curiosity. Where are we going to get together? Both Logan Drake and I had a brief meeting that was focused on the "that is right." A dive bar close to the water's edge was where I first encountered him. It was a place that smelt of old beer and secrets. His face was a roadmap of late hours and difficult stories. He was a man whose face was a roadmap. I did not provide him with any assumptions or feelings. I provided him with the facts. I gave him a flash drive that contained copies of the bogus legal documents, as well as Cale's forensic analysis, the sworn affidavit from the doctor who was coerced, and the affidavit from the doctor who was coerced. He looked over the facts, and then he looked at me, his journalistic eyes evaluating the trustworthiness of my statements. They did in fact pronounce you to be. Are you dead? He said, his tone containing a tinge of gloomy interest. The answer was legally, I affirmed. That was all he did. It was 6 o'clock in the morning when the preemptive strike was initiated. I'll be in touch. Monday morning to be exact. The story of Logan Drake was not buried on page 12 of the book. ProPublica, a non-profit organization that is a powerhouse in the field of investigative journalism, featured it front and foremost. Within the context of the Thorne family's struggle for control of the defense firm Aegis Dynamics, the headline was a cannon blast, a legacy in ashes, and an identity that was no longer present. The narrative exemplified greatness in terms of journalistic deconstruction. It lay out everything in a manner that was icy, unyielding, and indisputable. The check that was burned, the bogus death certificate, the fraudulent signatures on the stock transactions, and the televised interview that my father gave for his own benefit. In addition, Riker had discovered 2 former workers of Aegis who, although maintaining their anonymity, corroborated Maximilian's explosive temper as well as his long-standing scorn for my military career. When the story was told, it not only caused waves but it also caused a tsunami. Associated Press took it up and published it. Even before the sun had completely risen over San Diego, the press, Reuters, and every major news network were all present. The phrase "jogger justice for" became a trending topic across the country as it spread across social media platforms. When it came to anger, the veterans community, which is a powerful and vocal network, was ablaze. The stock price of Aegis Dynamic did not simply have a decrease. As soon as the New York Stock Exchange opened, it experienced a precipitous decline. An implosion had just occurred in the realm of power and control that my father had painstakingly created. Suddenly, they found themselves no longer in command of the story. Were the story being told. In addition, I was aware, with the conviction of a commander whose strategy was being executed flawlessly, that they were now reacting rather than acting, and that troops who are in a state of panic tend to make mistakes. The court hearing for the emergency case was set to take place that very same afternoon. The San Diego Superior Courthouse was the first building I entered. There was only one sound that I allowed myself to make, and that was the clicking of my dress shoes on the marble floor. It was no longer a sign of rebellion for me to wear my white uniform. It was a representation of truth and order in a place that was on the verge of being consumed by chaos. The two individuals, Richard and Vanessa, had already arrived and were gathered together with a group of 3 expensive corporate lawyers. Their faces were devoid of color. With the disappearance of the self-assured confidence, a brittle and defensive wrath took its place. His knuckles were white as he grasped the edge of the table, and my father was holding it. Vanessa recoiled in her seat, attempting to avert my stare, her designer outfit appearing to be armor that did not go well with her body. A suave man named Bryce Adler, who was their lead attorney, stepped up and immediately went on the offensive, attempting to dismiss Riker's story as tantamount to tabloid sensationalism and an attempt to discredit the article. It is terrible that private family concerns were taken public. However, Rhea was prepared. Having detected a vulnerability, she sprung to her feet like a predator. She announced, "Your Honor," with a voice that was unmistakable and resounded with authority. This is not a matter from the family's private life. In this case, charges of criminal fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to unlawfully grab control of a multi-billion-dollar organization are being brought against the defendant. Bryce Adler laughed in a mocking manner. "Miss Caldwell, you have been accused. Unsubstantiated charges made by a daughter who is dissatisfied with the situation. Is it a criminal accusation?" Bryce Adler, Mr. Bryce Adler, answered, her tone becoming a threateningly calm one as she did so. The full report that Cale had prepared was placed on the judge's bench once we had obtained an affidavit under oath from a forensic document analyst who was board certified. Does the fact that we have a videotape deposition from the very doctor who was tricked into signing a fake medical report constitute an allegation? It was a second file that she placed next to the first one. "What exactly is it, Your Honor? Is it an accusation?" As she turned to face the crowded courtroom, she made her statement. "When we consider the perpetrator, who was a highly decorated commander in the United States Navy, at this precise moment standing right here, the atmosphere in the room was electric." Bryce Adler's arguments were falling apart under the pressure of the evidence, and he was spitting back and forth. However, Rhea was not yet finished. She wanted to use one more weapon in her arsenal. "Your Honor, we would want to submit one more piece of testimony, which is a video statement that Admiral Thomas Reeve taped 1 month before he passed away. We would like to proceed with this presentation with the approval of the court." A woman named Clara Whitmore, who was known for her strictness and lack of nonsense, nodded. Approval has been obtained. The lights in the courtroom were turned down. A big amount. The screen was brought down from the ceiling. A moment later, he was present. "He is my granddad." Even though he appeared to be weak, the expression in his eyes conveyed an unwavering determination. It appeared as though he was looking straight into the camera, as if he were facing me, the judge, or my father. He looked directly into the camera. "If you are viewing this," his voice, which was calm and authoritative, filled the room that was otherwise silent. "It indicates that Richard Harlan, my son-in-law, has made an effort to disobey my last intentions and to deny my granddaughter the right to vote. Permit me to make no ambiguous statements. He has built an empire based on his greed, and I have seen it. In addition, I have witnessed my granddaughter construct her life based on honor. There was never any uncertainty over the decision." He halted, taking a deep breath to stabilize himself. "My legacy is not solely comprised of financial wealth or a business. It is about having integrity, and I am giving that legacy to the sole member of this family who genuinely comprehends what it means to have integrity. In addition to being my granddaughter, Lieutenant Commander Alexandra Reeve is also a fellow warrior. The choice I made was one that I made of my own free will while maintaining a healthy mind and body. It is a violation of this final testament for any document, any claim, or any action to conflict therewith, both a falsehood and a fraud." Once the video was over, there was a complete and utter hush that returned to the room. Richard was the focus of everyone's attention. At that moment, All of the color had disappeared from his face. Clara Whitmore stared down from the bench, her expression like granite. She looked directly at my father. He appeared to be crushed and defeated, like a king who had been dethroned not by an opposing army but by the straightforward, unassailable truth that was revealed by a deceased man. She addressed him as Mr. Thorne, her tone as icy and acerbic as a razor's blade. This court concludes that there is sufficient evidence that are believable of fraud, forgery, and perjury were all committed as part of a conspiracy. She turned her attention to Vanessa, who was in a state of shock, and she looked at you, Miss Thorne, as a willing accomplice. As the gavel was brought down, the sound reverberated throughout the courtroom, resembling the conclusion of a deadly gunshot. All corporate activities and asset transfers that were carried out under the fraudulent power are hereby declared null and void, and they are placed on hold until further investigation. Lieutenant Commander is to be established as the sole successor and controlling party of Aegis Dynamics, and the estate of Admiral is to be carried out in accordance with the written document. This matter has been forwarded to the Office of the District Attorney for the purpose of conducting a criminal investigation. Not a chance. The conflict had come to an end. I had triumphed. Without a doubt, the triumph in the courtroom was decisive. On the other hand, it did not feel like a good time. There was, without a doubt, a great sensation of release. Nevertheless, this was immediately followed by the profound, bone-weary tiredness that comes after a lengthy and aggressive campaign. The war had come to an end, but the aftershocks were only beginning. A private and introspective taking place. I was sent a text message by Vanessa 1 week after the verdict was handed down. There are only 3 words. Talk to me if you please. The day after we won, I recalled the counsel that Rhea had given to me. I consented to meet with her when she told me, "You won the war, Alexandra. Now you have to decide who gets to live in your peacetime." We were in her office at the time. On neutral ground, a little independent coffee shop in the historic gas lamp quarter, a location filled with the ghosts of a different San Diego. Not at the mansion in Coronado, not at the headquarters of Aegis, but on neutral ground. At the time that I arrived, she was already there, seated at a tiny table that was located by the window. She had a look, decreased in size. A flawless makeup application was not able to conceal the dark circles that appeared beneath her eyes as a result of her lack of sleep, and her pricey Chanel suit appeared to dangle off her body. The unwavering assurance and the sense of supremacy that had been present had long since vanished. In its place came a fragile frailty that was eager for help. While I was seated, she started by saying, "Sif," with a tiny tremor in her voice. As she stretched across the table, her hand, which was immaculately manicured, hovered, yearning to touch mine. "I am so sorry." In no way did I draw away in a hostile manner. My hand was just released, rest in my lap, so establishing a border that is visible yet inaccessible. When I first started, I had no idea how far it would go. She made a stuttering sound. During the process of reorganization, Dad, he explained that it was nothing more than legal paperwork, a strategy to safeguard the assets. I merely signed in the spot where he instructed me to. Her justifications were so feeble and so obvious that they were nearly disrespectful to the audience. A child who was caught with her hand in the cookie jar when she was caught lying. She had signed the phony transfer forms, and I had seen her signature on them. In the attorney's office, where my inheritance was being handled, I had witnessed her covert complicity, lit a blaze in it. During the time that my father was weaving his web of deceit, I had witnessed her standing by his side. I allowed her remarks to linger in the air for a considerable amount of time, with the only sound that broke the silence being the hiss of the espresso machine. "You signed my name to transfer my shares, Vanessa," I remarked, my tone not angry but rather serene and unruffled. When I was conducting a cross-examination of a witness who I knew was dishonest, I used this person's voice. "You were there when your father burned that check, but you remained silent when he humiliated me in front of the public on television, implying that I was mentally insane. However, I am your sister. But I am unstable. That is not knowing. That is a choice. You made a choice." Tears welled up in her eyes, pouring over and making clear pathways through her foundation. I stared at her, really looked at her, and felt a profound and tired melancholy. The anger had already burnt itself out, leaving only the cold ash of reality. "Family doesn't do what you did, Vanessa," I said. "We're family." She choked out the words, which were a last desperate appeal to a link that she herself had tried to dissolve, said, my voice still quiet. Family doesn't try to have one of their own, declared Legally Dead. Family doesn't try to erase someone's existence for financial gain. I leaned forward slightly. You had a choice to make between doing what was right and doing what Dad wanted. Between your sister and your ambition, you chose your side. You chose ambition over loyalty. And in a way I respect that clarity. But now, I said, my gaze unwavering. You have to live with it. I stood up, pulling a $20 bill from my wallet and placing it on the table to cover our coffees. The finality of the gesture seemed to register with her. Her face crumpled. Please, Seraph, don't do this. I looked down at her one last time. I'm not going to press for criminal charges against you, I said. And this was my final act of grace, a mercy she didn't deserve, but that I needed to give for myself. I don't want to become like him, consumed by the need to destroy. But you are no longer a part of my life. There is no Aegis for you. There is no Volkov Foundation. There is nothing. Goodbye, Yalda. I turned and walked away without looking back. I could hear a choked sob behind me, the sound of a bridge collapsing into the abyss. But I kept walking. It hurt. It was a clean surgical pain, like an amputation necessary to save a life. My life. I was stepping out of their long dark shadow and into the light, alone but finally truly free. In the aftermath of the storm, a quiet dawn began to break. The first thing I did with my reclaimed power was not to sit in my father's chair. The leather CEO throne at Aegis Dynamics did not appeal to me because it was a seat built on a foundation of ruthless ambition, a world that I had long since left behind. Instead, I exercised my controlling shares to do what my grandfather was unable to do. I cleaned house. I installed a new board of directors, which consisted of people of integrity, including retired military officers and ethical business leaders who understood that profit and principle were not mutually exclusive. I then forged a new legacy. I took a chance on a new opportunity, significant portion of the company's profits, and established the Volkov Foundation, Honor, Service, Future. Its headquarters were not in a corporate skyscraper, but in a restored brick building at Liberty Station, the very place where my own fight for justice had been planned. We transformed the old naval building into a state-of-the-art support center for female veterans, a sanctuary for women who, like me, had served their country, only to find themselves fighting new battles back home. We offered free legal counsel from Ria's firm, career transition workshops, housing assistance, and mental health resources. I wasn't just building a nonprofit. I was building the safety net that I never had. I was building a home for warriors. My grandfather often quoted the Bible to me, and one verse in particular echoed in my mind during those first few months of building. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. My mercy was not for my father or my sister. It was for myself. It was the mercy of choosing to build rather than to destroy, to heal rather than to inflict more pain that I realized was the final act of defiance against their world. One afternoon, a young woman walked into the foundation's office. She was hesitant, her shoulders slumped with a familiar weight. She was a former Marine corporal, I learned, who had been given a less than honorable discharge. After she reported a superior officer for harassment, the system designed to protect her had instead turned on her, labeling her a troublemaker and pushing her out. She sat across from my desk, her story tumbling out in a quiet, pained voice, her eyes filled with a desperate, hopeless exhaustion. I knew all too well. I didn't make any grand promises. I simply listened. When she was finished, I looked at her, not as a client, but as a sister in arms. You are not alone anymore, I told her, my voice gentle but firm. We will fight with you. That day, Ria took on her case pro bono. Kale offered his forensic skills to analyze digital evidence. We gave her a second chance, a team to, and as I stood in her corner and watched her walk out of the office, her shoulders slightly straighter and her eyes holding a flicker of renewed hope, I finally understood what my grandfather's true legacy was. It wasn't the $38 million. It wasn't the controlling shares of a corporation. It was this one moment, this single life that was given the opportunity to be whole again. A few months later, on what would have been my grandfather's birthday, I drove my old Jeep out to Coronado Beach. The sun was setting, and I was able to watch her walk out of the building, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. The Grand Thorn Mansion stood on the shoreline nearby, a silent, opulent monument to a life I no longer wanted. I didn't look at it. My gaze was fixed on the vast open horizon of the Pacific Ocean. I pulled the old brass compass from my pocket. I didn't need it to find my way anymore. But I held it as a reminder of the man who had taught me what true north really was. The salty ocean breeze whipped through my hair, carrying with it a profound sense of peace. The war was over. The scars remained, etched into my memory, but they no longer act. They were a map of where I had been, a testament to the strength I had found. I was not the product of their coldness. I was the legacy of my grandfather's love, forged in their fire and rebuilt from the ashes. My story, the battle for my name, is over. But I know for many of you, your own battles are still being fought every day. My grandfather taught me that honor is a legacy you build. If this story has reminded you of your own strength, of your own unshakable true north, then my story has found its true purpose. Thank you for listening. If you believe in the power of building a new legacy from the ashes of the past, please subscribe to this channel and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. You are not alone.